The sun had set hours ago, but the horizons still glowed faintly, as if the world were trying to hold on to the last threads of light. Beyond the iron gates of the old amusement park, shadows stretched long and deep, a black labyrinth of forgotten thrills and long-buried screams. The sign above the entrance, Wondermirth Amusements, hung crookedly, its paint flaking, leaving only ghostly traces of the once bright letters. It had been abandoned for decades, but tonight it was alive again. Sam, Mia, and Chris stared at the gates, each gripping their flashlight tightly. A dare, stupid and impulsive, had brought them here. Mia, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes at Chris's bravado. "I bet you're too chicken to make it to the Ferris wheel," Chris taunted. He had a knack for acting unbothered even when his knuckles whitened around the flashlight. "Let's just get it over with," Mia said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The sooner we walk through, the sooner we leave." Sam said nothing. The youngest of the trio, he had been the quiet one since their parents passed a year ago. He looked at the darkness ahead, something in it stirring an unease that wasn't just fear. It felt personal, as if the park were waiting for him. The trio stepped inside, their shoes crunching over debris that had once been popcorn, tickets, and dreams. A faint wind whistled through the skeletal remains of rides, carrying with it an unsettling melody, like carnival music distorted by time. The carousel was the first to greet them. Its painted horses, long since dulled and cracked, stared with eyeless sockets. As Mia's light swept across the ride, it flickered. "Battery's dying," she muttered, shaking it. "That's how it starts," Chris teased, his voice uneven. Next thing you know, the horses start. The carousel lit up. Bulbs that had been broken for decades flickered and glowed, perhaps throwing the horses into a kaleidoscope of eerie colors. Slowly, the platform began to turn, the warped Calliope music winding up as if summoned from the grave. "Who?" Mia began, but Chris was already tugging her away. "Forget it. Someone's messing with us. Who'd mess around in this dump?" Sam whispered, his eyes glued to the carousel. One of the horses turned to face him, its wooden teeth splitting into an unnatural grin. He blinked, and the horse was still again. The path led them deeper into the park. Overhead, the skeletal track of the roller coaster creaked in the wind. Below it, they passed rows of carnival booths. The air reeked of mildew and decay, and their flashlights caught glimpses of shattered bottles, deflated balloons, and prizes still hanging from rusted hooks, stuffed bears with eyes that followed their every move. "Do you hear that?" Sam whispered. Mia and Chris stopped. A faint sound, like laughter, echoed around them. Not joyful, not human, but jagged and wrong, as though it came from mouths that hadn't laughed in years. It grew louder, overlapping itself, a chorus of madness that swirled in the dark. "Run," Chris hissed. But as they turned, the path behind them had changed. What was once the way back was now a twisted alley lined with mirrors, each reflecting them in warped, hideous ways. "This wasn't here before," Mia stammered. She stepped toward one mirror and froze. Her reflection stood there, staring, but its mouth moved independently, whispering words she couldn't hear. She stepped back, and the reflection grinned. Chris turned his flashlight up to the sky, catching sight of the Ferris wheel. It loomed ahead, its skeletal structure swaying unnaturally. The gondolas creaked, though no wind blew. One of the cabins was lit, glowing a deep, bloody red. "We need to keep moving," Sam said, his voice trembling. They approached the wheel cautiously, every sound around them amplified. The ground beneath their feet felt alive, pulsating faintly as if the earth itself were breathing. When they reached the Ferris wheel, they found a sign lying in the dirt. "Ticket required." "There's no one here," Chris snapped, kicking the sign. His words triggered a cacophony of groans from the ride, its mechanisms shuddering to life. The gondolas descended, the glowing red cabin stopping before them. Its door creaked open, revealing an interior that looked impossibly deep, as though it stretched down into the ground rather than the air. "We're not getting on that," Mia said, taking a step back. "Then where do we go?" Sam asked. Behind them, the mirrors from earlier had returned, forming a wall of reflections that showed them horrors. Images of themselves twisted and mangled, mouths agape in eternal screams. The laughter returned, louder and closer, accompanied by the pattering of footsteps. Many footsteps. Shadowy figures emerged from the dark, faces obscured but limbs unnaturally elongated. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, as though something unseen pulled their strings. Chris grabbed Mia's arm. "We have to go inside." Before Mia could protest, Sam stepped forward. "It's me they want," he said softly. "What are you talking about?" Mia asked. "They've been calling me," he replied, his voice distant. Without another word, he climbed into the gondola. The shadows froze, their heads cocking in unison. "Sam, no!" Mia screamed, but the door slammed shut behind him. The Ferris wheel began to turn, rising impossibly fast. The shadows surged forward, and Chris pulled Mia into the next gondola. Inside, the air was freezing, the walls vibrating with whispers. The ride ascended, the park below transforming. What had been a ruin was now vibrant, lit with sickly green and red lights, the rides alive with crowds of faceless people. But there was no joy, only torment. Screams of agony blended with distorted carnival tunes. The wheel reached its peak and stopped. Sam's gondola hung across from theirs, suspended over an abyss that wasn't there before, a swirling void of darkness and claws. His face appeared at the window, his mouth moving as if shouting, but no sound reached them. Then the gondola plummeted, swallowed by the void. Chris and Mia screamed, but before they could move, their own gondola lurched downward. They woke up outside the park, lying on the cold ground. The gates were shut, the park silent. But Sam was gone, and when they looked back at the entrance, the sign had changed. It now read, "Sam's Wondermirth Amusements, opening soon."
Story number 2.
The fog was thick and cold, clinging to the earth like an unwelcome visitor as the group arrived at Blackmore Funland, a long-abandoned amusement park rumored to be cursed. The legend went that every 20 years the park came alive for one night, drawing in unsuspecting visitors with promises of wonder and thrills. Only those who entered were never seen again. Aaron, Alex, Nina, and Tyler had heard the stories but dismissed them as urban legends. They were adrenaline junkies, always seeking out places to explore and test their courage. Tonight was no different, except the air felt wrong the moment they stepped past the rusted gates. A distorted jingle echoed through the air, faint but unmistakable. Carnival music. It wove through the fog, beckoning them deeper into the park. Erin shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Let's find the roller coaster," Alex said, forcing a grin. His flashlight's beam barely cut through the haze, but he strode ahead with false confidence. As they ventured deeper, the world around them seemed to shift. The structures of the park, once broken and derelict, appeared strangely intact. Neon lights flickered to life, their colors sickly and unnatural. The air buzzed with the low hum of electricity, and laughter, faint but chilling, echoed through the night. They reached the tilt-a-whirl first. The ride sat motionless, and its cars pristine, almost inviting. A single sign hung nearby, "Spin into eternity. All rides are free tonight." "That wasn't there before," Tyler muttered, stepping closer to inspect it. "Neither was this," Nina whispered, pointing to the ride. The cars were moving now, slowly spinning, though no one was operating it. The sound of creaking metal mixed with a low groaning that didn't belong. Alex laughed nervously. "It's just a malfunction. Probably on some kind of timer." "Yeah, right," Aaron said, backing away. "Let's keep going." But as they turned, the fog closed in tighter, pressing against them like a living thing. They tried retracing their steps, but every path led to another ride. The carousel, the Ferris wheel, bumper cars, all alive, moving, though no one else was there. "We're going in circles," Nina hissed, her voice shaking. "Shh," Aaron said suddenly, holding up a hand. The others fell silent, listening. A faint voice carried on the wind, distant but distinct. "Aaron," it was soft, like a whisper just behind her ear. She spun around, but no one was there. "Don't mess with me," she snapped, glaring at Alex. "That wasn't me," Alex said, his face pale. The voice came again, louder this time, and not just one, many. They spoke in overlapping tones, calling each of their names. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread tightened around them. "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, his voice cracking. As they ran, the park seemed to shift and twist. The paths warped, leading them to the Hall of Mirrors, a building they swore hadn't been there before. Its lights flickered on, casting long shadows that danced unnaturally. A sign above the entrance read, "See yourself forever." "We can't keep running in circles," Alex said, panting. "Let's cut through and see if there's a way out the other side." Nina hesitated, staring at the building's entrance. The mirrors reflected nothing but darkness, even though their flashlights shone directly into them. "I don't like this." But Alex was already inside, his figure disappearing into the gloom. The others had no choice but to follow. The moment they entered, the door slammed shut behind them. The air was suffocatingly still, the only sound their breathing. The mirrors reflected distorted versions of themselves, twisted, monstrous, grinning faces where their own should have been. Erin's reflection tilted its head unnaturally, its mouth stretching wide in a silent scream. She stumbled backward, only to feel cold hands grip her shoulders. She spun around, but no one was there. "We need to get out of here now," Nina said, her voice trembling. The hallway seemed endless, each step taking them further from reality. Shadows darted in the corners of their eyes, and the mirrors began to show impossible scenes. In one, Tyler saw himself running, then tripping, screaming as something unseen dragged him into the darkness. In another, Nina watched herself pounding on the glass, blood dripping from her fingertips as the mirror world consumed her. "Don't look," Erin warned, grabbing Nina's arm. But it was too late. Nina's reflection smiled, stepped forward, and pressed a hand against the glass. The real Nina froze as her reflection pulled her into the mirror with a sickening lurch. She vanished, her screams echoing through the hall. "Run!" Alex shouted, dragging Erin and Tyler forward. The mirrors cracked and shattered as they passed, the shards forming jagged mouths that whispered their names. They burst out the other side into an open plaza, the Blackmore Funland Big Top looming ahead. Its tattered banner flapped in the wind, and laughter, deep and guttural, boomed from within. "Don't go in there," Tyler said, his voice desperate. But the ground beneath them began to crack, long blackened fingers clawing their way up from the earth. The only path was forward. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of decay and burnt sugar. A single spotlight illuminated the center ring, where a figure stood, a clown with hollow eyes and a painted grin that dripped like wet ink. "Welcome to the show," it rasped, its voice cutting through their thoughts. "We've been waiting for you." The spotlight expanded, revealing dozens of figures seated in the stands, silent, unmoving. Their faces were blank, featureless, until the trio realized they weren't faces at all. They were masks, each one bearing the name of a victim. Nina's mask hung from the rafters, still wet with blood. "You're the finale," the clown whispered. Its painted smile stretched wider as the lights went out. Erin woke up alone at the gates, the fog dissipating with the first rays of dawn. The park was silent, lifeless, but she knew the truth. The names on the masks were gone, replaced by Alex's, Tyler's, and hers. And in the distance, the Big Top's banner now read, "The fun never ends."
Story number 3.
The old amusement park had always been a blight on the edge of town, its rusted roller coaster tracks curling into the sky like skeletal fingers. Locals called it Dead Men's Fair, a grim nickname earned after a tragic accident decades ago when a ride had collapsed, killing dozens. The park shut down that same night, and no one dared venture inside. Until now. It was supposed to be a joke, an initiation for newcomers to the college's paranormal club. Jenna, Kyle, and Marcus had drawn the short straws, tasked with spending a night inside the park and returning with proof. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and a sense of invincibility fueled by youthful arrogance, they climbed the rusted fence under the pale glow of a crescent moon. As they dropped down on the other side, the air changed. It was colder, heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang that stung their noses. "This place reeks," Jenna muttered, scanning the darkness with her flashlight. "Relax," Kyle said, pulling out the camera. "We'll get a few creepy shots and be out of here before midnight." Marcus didn't reply. He was staring at the haunted tunnel, its entrance framed by jagged wooden planks that resembled teeth. A faded sign above it read, "Laugh till you die." "We're not going in there, right?" Marcus asked, his voice uneasy. "Not yet," Kyle said, smirking. "Let's check out the carousel first." They walked down the cracked path, their footsteps echoing unnaturally. The carousel came into view, its once bright colors faded to muted shades of rot. The horses were grotesque caricatures, wild-eyed with gaping mouths, their painted smiles peeling away to reveal splintered wood. "Perfect," Kyle said, snapping a photo. As the flash went off, the carousel sprang to life. The lights flickered on, casting harsh, uneven shadows. The horses began to move, jerking back and forth as if trying to break free from their poles. The Calliope music screeched to life, warped and discordant. "That's not funny, Kyle," Jenna said, backing away. "I didn't do that," he replied, his voice cracking. The carousel slowed, the lights dimming until it was once again still. But now, one of the horses was missing. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, scanning the ride. Behind them, something clattered. They turned, flashlights darting toward the sound. A wooden horse lay sprawled on the ground, its painted face twisted into an impossibly malevolent grin. That wasn't there before, Jenna said. Let's keep moving, Kyle said quickly, leading them deeper into the park. They passed the rusted remnants of games and food stalls. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the faint beams of their flashlights. Faint whispers followed them, growing louder with every step. The Ferris wheel towered ahead, its gondolas swaying gently in the still air. A single gondola was lit, glowing a sickly green. "Did you see that?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah," Jenna said. "It's probably just a—" Her sentence was cut short as the Ferris wheel creaked, the entire structure groaning to life. The gondola descended slowly, stopping directly in front of them. Its door creaked open, revealing a dark interior that pulsed faintly with green light. "Nope," Marcus said, stepping back. "We need to check it out," Kyle said, raising the camera. "This is exactly the kind of thing we need for proof." "Are you insane?" Jenna snapped, but Kyle was already stepping into the gondola. The door slammed shut behind him. "Kyle!" Jenna screamed, pounding on the glass. Inside, Kyle's flashlight flickered as he stared at something they couldn't see. The Ferris wheel lurched upward, carrying Kyle into the night. His screams echoed down to them, fading as the gondola climbed higher and higher. Then the wheel stopped, its green light extinguished. Jenna and Marcus stood frozen, staring at the now empty Ferris wheel. "Where did he go?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Jenna said, her voice shaking. "We have to find him." The whispers grew louder, now mixed with faint laughter, high-pitched and cruel. They turned to see figures emerging from the shadows, carnival workers with grotesque, melted faces and eyes that burned like coals. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, their mouths opening too wide as they cackled. "Run," Jenna shouted, grabbing Marcus's arm. They sprinted toward the haunted tunnel, their only option as the path behind them filled with the advancing figures. Inside, the air was damp and suffocating. Faded clown faces adorned the walls, their painted eyes bleeding streaks of red. The tunnel seemed endless, each step taking them deeper into the dark. Their flashlights flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of movement just outside the beams. A voice echoed from ahead, deep and resonant. "You can't leave now. The show isn't over." Jenna and Marcus froze. A shadow loomed at the end of the tunnel, impossibly tall and wearing a tattered ringmaster's coat. Its face was obscured, but its eyes glowed like dying embers. "Where's Kyle?" Jenna demanded, her voice breaking. The figure extended a long, skeletal hand pointing toward a side door that hadn't been there before. "He's waiting, but you'll have to play to see him again." The door creaked open, revealing a small room filled with mirrors. Each reflected a version of Jenna and Marcus, but not as they were now. In one mirror, Jenna was hunched over, her face gaunt and her hair matted with blood. In another, Marcus was bound to a chair, his mouth sewn shut, his eyes wide with terror. "I'm not going in there," Marcus said, backing away. The door behind them slammed shut, leaving them no choice. As they stepped inside, the mirrors shimmered. The reflections began to move independently, reaching toward them from behind the glass. "Don't look," Jenna whispered, grabbing Marcus's arm. But the mirrors cracked, and hands, cold, sharp, and wrong, pulled at their clothes, dragging them closer to the glass. The last thing Jenna saw before the darkness consumed her was her own face in the mirror, grinning as it whispered, "Welcome home." The next morning, the park was silent again. The Ferris wheel was still, the carousel broken. But if you listened closely, you could hear faint laughter carried on the wind, and see 3 new figures standing in the mirrors of the haunted tunnel, their faces forever frozen in silent screams.
Story number 4.
The night air was thick with mist as Liam, Sophia, and Rachel climbed the chain-link fence surrounding Moonvale Amusement Park. The park had been shut down for over 30 years after a string of mysterious disappearances, yet it remained a favorite dare for thrill-seekers and ghost hunters. Tonight, the 3 friends decided to document their visit for Liam's growing horror channel. The moment they landed on the other side of the fence, the world seemed to shift. The air was colder, and the sound of crickets abruptly ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. Sophia shivered. "This place is bad," she muttered, hugging herself. "Don't start," Liam said, adjusting the camera strap to his chest. "We're here for the footage. 1 hour, and we're out." Rachel nodded, but her eyes lingered on the looming shapes of rides in the distance. The Ferris wheel stood like a sentinel, its rusted spokes barely visible through the mist. Lights flickered briefly, then vanished, like the park was teasing them. As they ventured deeper, their flashlights cut through the haze, illuminating the rotting remnants of food stalls and ride signs. A faint smell of burnt sugar and mold hung in the air. Liam stopped at a faded poster on a wall. It featured a clown with hollow eyes and a painted grin too wide for its face. The words beneath it read, "Step right up, the laughs never end." "I hate clowns," Rachel muttered. "Everyone does," Liam replied. He turned the camera toward her, "which is why this is going to go viral." The camera beeped and cut out. "Damn it," Liam said, fiddling with the buttons. A soft sound broke the silence, a giggle, faint but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Liam said quickly, though his hands were trembling. "Probably just the wind." They pressed on, the giggle growing louder, joined by the sound of distant footsteps. They reached the bumper cars, their flashlights catching glints of shattered glass and rusted metal. One car sat in the center of the arena, pristine and gleaming. "That wasn't there before," Rachel said. "It's just a prop," Liam said, though he sounded less certain. "For, like, a Halloween thing." "Yeah? Then why does it look brand new?" Sophia asked, her voice tight. The car's headlights blinked on, casting harsh beams of light directly at them. A long, low honk followed, as if mocking them. "Let's keep moving," Liam said, his voice shaking. As they walked away, the sound of tires screeching on concrete filled the air. The bumper car skidded forward, engine roaring unnaturally loud. "Run," Sophia screamed. The three of them bolted, weaving between collapsed structures and piles of debris. The car's headlights bobbed behind them, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Liam turned to look back, catching a glimpse of something behind the wheel. Not a driver, but a face painted on the windshield, its mouth stretched in a blood-curdling grin. They didn't stop running until they reached the funhouse, its gaping entrance framed by warped mirrors. Liam hesitated, but the sound of the car drawing closer left them no choice. They plunged inside, slamming the door behind them. The funhouse was worse than the outside. The air was humid and carried a stench of rot. Dim, flickering lights illuminated the warped mirrors lining the walls. Each one reflected distorted versions of themselves. Twisted limbs, hollow eyes, faces frozen in expressions of terror. "Don't look at them," Sophia said, clutching Rachel's arm. "Why not?" Rachel asked, but as she spoke, her reflection moved, raising its hand to point at her. She froze, her breath hitching. "Rachel, don't!" Liam shouted, grabbing her shoulder. But it was too late. Her reflection's mouth stretched open, wider than it should have been, emitting a high-pitched laugh. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing outward, and Rachel let out a scream as her body was yanked toward it. She struggled, clawing at the floor, but the reflection pulled her into the mirror, her screams abruptly silenced. "No!" Sophia shouted, pounding on the glass. The reflection now showed only Rachel's terrified face, trapped and banging silently from the other side. "We have to go," Liam said, dragging Sophia away. Tears streamed down her face, but she followed. They stumbled deeper into the funhouse, the distorted mirrors closing in around them. The walls seemed to breathe, bulging inward as if the building itself were alive. The laughter from the mirrors followed them, growing louder, interspersed with faint whispers of their names. Ahead, a red door glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "That's the way out," Liam said, rushing toward it. "How do you know?" Sophia asked, her voice breaking. "Do you want to stay here?" he snapped. They burst through the door and found themselves standing on the midway. The rides were alive now, their lights flickering and moving as if the park had returned to its prime. The carousel spun in slow, jerky rotations, its horses staring with glowing eyes. The Ferris wheel creaked to life, its gondolas swaying violently. The air vibrated with the sound of warped carnival music and screams that didn't belong to them. "Where do we go?" Sophia cried. Before Liam could answer, a figure stepped out of the mist. It was the clown from the poster, impossibly tall and thin, its painted face peeling like old wallpaper. It held a tattered balloon in one hand and waved with the other, its grin impossibly wide. "Stay and play," it rasped, its voice echoing unnaturally. The balloon popped, and darkness poured out, swallowing the lights of the park. Liam and Sophia turned to run, but the ground beneath them cracked, splitting open into a swirling void. Clawed hands reached up, dragging them down as the clown's laughter filled their ears. The next day, Moonvale Amusement Park was quiet again. Its gates rusted shut and the ride silent. But if you pressed your ear to the fence, you might hear faint laughter, distorted screams, and the hiss of a bumper car's engine revving in the distance.
Story number 5.
The small town of Hollow Pines had a secret that no one dared speak aloud. On the outskirts of town, nestled deep in the woods, was Spectre's Carnival, an amusement park that appeared only once every decade. No one built it, and no one maintained it. It just appeared as though summoned from some dark void. The locals whispered that those who entered never came back. But to outsiders, it was just a creepy urban legend. For Sam, Julie, and Connor, it was the perfect destination for a thrill-seeking adventure. The three friends had heard about the carnival during a late-night road trip and decided to check it out despite the warnings of the gas station clerk who told them to stay far away. "Don't go looking for trouble," the clerk had said, his voice shaking. "Spectre's Carnival doesn't let you leave." But they laughed it off. Ghost stories weren't real, after all. They found the carnival at midnight. The entrance arch was grand and grotesque, its design a macabre display of grinning skulls and skeletal hands holding glowing lanterns. Above it, in curling letters, were the words, "One night only. Come play forever." The park was alive, its rides spinning and lights flashing, yet no one else was there. A warped melody played over crackling speakers, a haunting version of a Calliope tune that set their teeth on edge. "This is insane," Connor said, pulling out his phone to record. "Look at this place!" Julie glanced at the towering Ferris wheel in the distance, its cabins swinging unnaturally fast. "How is everything running? There's no one here." "Who cares?" Sam said, grinning. "Let's explore." They walked toward the House of Horrors, its entrance adorned with grotesque gargoyle statues. The door creaked open as they approached, as though inviting them in. Julie hesitated. "Maybe we should stick to the rides," she said. "Oh, come on," Sam said, grabbing her hand. "It's just a haunted house. It'll be fun." Reluctantly, Julie followed. Inside, the air was damp and cold, carrying a metallic tang. The narrow hallway was lined with dusty mirrors, each one reflecting the trio back in distorted, unsettling ways. In one mirror, Sam's reflection had hollow eyes. In another, Julie's face was twisted into a grotesque sneer, her teeth too long and sharp. Connor's reflection smiled at him, but his reflection's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Okay, this is seriously creepy," Julie whispered. "Keep going," Sam said, his voice a little less confident now. They rounded a corner and found themselves in a room filled with mannequins. They stood in various poses, some mid-scream, others reaching out as though in desperation. One mannequin wore a faded carnival worker's uniform, its painted face frozen in a sinister grin. As they passed, Julie gasped. "It moved." Connor laughed nervously. "It's just your imagination." "No, it wasn't," Julie insisted, pointing. But when they turned back, the mannequin was in the same position. "Let's just get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. They turned toward the exit, only to find the hallway they had entered through was gone. In its place was a set of narrow stairs leading downward. The sound of faint laughter echoed from below. "Nope, no way," Connor said, backing away. But the lights flickered, and the mannequins began to move, their heads snapping toward the trio with a sickening crack. One stepped forward, its hollow eyes fixed on them. "Run!" Sam shouted. They bolted down the stairs, the sound of clattering footsteps following them. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling down into the earth, until they burst into a dimly lit room. The air was stifling, and the walls were covered in posters of missing people. Each one had a date scrawled across it, the nights the carnival had appeared. Julie gasped as she recognized one of the posters. "That's my cousin, Jacob. He disappeared 10 years ago." A low, guttural voice filled the room. "You're just in time to join him." They turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was the mannequin from before, but it was no longer made of plaster. Its face was a mask of flesh, its grin impossibly wide, exposing jagged teeth. "Time to play," it rasped. The trio scrambled through another door, finding themselves in the middle of the carnival once again. But now, everything had changed. The rides were moving faster, their colors dark and warped. The carousel horses had red, glowing eyes and snarling mouths. The Ferris wheel spun erratically, its cabins empty, but swinging violently. "Where's the exit?" Julie screamed. "There!" Connor pointed toward the entrance arch. But as they ran toward it, the ground beneath them shifted, the cobblestones turning into writhing black tendrils that wrapped around their legs. Sam yanked free and helped Julie up, but Connor was pulled under, his screams cutting off abruptly. The ground where he had stood smoothed over. leaving no trace of him. "Connor!" Julie sobbed, but Sam dragged her forward. They reached the archway, but instead of the dark woods they had come through, it opened into an endless void. The sign above it flickered, the words changing to, "No one leaves." Behind them, the carnival figures emerged. The mannequin, the carousel horses, the grinning clowns. They were all coming, their laughter blending into a deafening cacophony. Sam and Julie turned back to the void. It was their only option. "Together," Sam said, grabbing her hand. They stepped into the darkness, falling endlessly. The next morning, the woods outside Hollow Pines were empty again. Spectre's carnival had vanished, leaving nothing but a few trampled bushes and the faint echo of laughter in the air. In the town square, new posters appeared overnight. They featured Sam, Julie, and Connor's faces, their eyes wide with terror. Below their photos were the words, "Missing since last night."
Story number 6.
The storm raged outside as 5 friends, Emma, Jake, Mia, Lucas, and Tasha, sought shelter in the abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated sign above the gate read, "Whispering Shadows Amusement Park," the letters barely visible under layers of grime and rust. No one had dared to step foot in the park for years, not since the infamous tragedy when the entire staff and dozens of visitors had disappeared in a single night. The locals said the park was cursed, but the friends laughed off the tales as they squeezed through the gap in the fence. They needed a place to wait out the storm, and this was as good as any. Once inside, the air seemed to grow colder. The storm's howl muffled, replaced by an eerie silence. The rides stood frozen, their bright paint dulled by decades of neglect. A warped melody crackled through hidden speakers, as if the park were trying to wake itself from a long sleep. "This place is creepy as hell," Tasha muttered, hugging herself. "Relax," Jake said with forced bravado. "It's just an old park. Nothing's going to happen." Emma scanned their surroundings uneasily. "Let's just find some shelter and stay together, okay?" They decided to take refuge in the Funland Arcade, a squat building with a flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly in the rain. Inside, the arcade machines were still standing, and though their screens were black and buttons coated in dust, a faint smell of burnt plastic lingered in the air. Lucas wiped a layer of grime from a machine labeled "Shh, Midnight Clown Attack." As he touched it, the screen flickered to life, displaying the words, "Insert coin to play." "No way this still works," Lucas said, laughing nervously. "Try it," Jake said, tossing him a quarter. Lucas shrugged and slid the coin into the slot. The machine let out a distorted chime, and the screen filled with pixelated clowns wielding oversized mallets. "You sure that's a good idea?" Mia asked, her voice tight. "It's just a game," Lucas said, pressing the start button. He moved the joystick, guiding his character through a maze while dodging clowns that popped up at random. The clowns moved erratically, their distorted faces growing more grotesque as he progressed. Suddenly, the game froze, and the screen displayed a message, "Look behind you." Lucas laughed uneasily. "Okay, that's a good scare." "Lucas," Emma whispered, pointing toward the corner of the room. A figure stood there, barely visible in the dim light. A clown with pale, sagging skin and a painted smile that stretched far too wide, its glassy eyes locked onto them. "Let's get out of here," Mia said, grabbing Lucas's arm. The clown tilted its head, then lunged forward with unnatural speed. The friends screamed, scattering as it barreled through the arcade, overturning machines with inhuman strength. "Run!" Emma shouted, leading the group out of the building. Rain pelted them as they sprinted across the park, their breath visible in the frigid air. Behind them, the clown's laughter echoed, a twisted sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The group dove into the Hall of Mirrors, slamming the door shut behind them. The space was dimly lit by flickering bulbs, the mirrors stretching in endless, distorted reflections. Their ragged breathing filled the room. "This was a mistake," Tasha said, her voice shaking. "No kidding," Jake snapped, pacing as he tried to catch his breath. "What the hell was that thing?" Before anyone could answer, the mirrors began to shimmer. In each reflection, the friends were not themselves. Emma's mirror self was clawing at the glass, her eyes sunken and bleeding. Lucas's reflection had no mouth, only a smooth expanse of skin where it should have been. Mia's reflected face split into 3, each one screaming silently. "Don't look at them!" Emma shouted, but it was too late. Tasha gasped, her reflection smiling back at her with jagged teeth. A hand reached out from the glass, grabbing her wrist and yanking her forward. Tasha screamed as she was pulled into the mirror, her body vanishing. Her reflection lingered, pressed against the other side of the glass, pounding and mouthing inaudible words. Go! Go! Jake yelled, dragging the others toward the exit. They stumbled into the rain-soaked midway, but the park had changed. The rides were no longer broken and lifeless. The Ferris wheel spun rapidly, its lights pulsing in sickly greens and yellows. The carousel churned, its horses snarling and snapping at the air. The air was filled with distorted carnival music and the distant sound of laughter. There! Lucas pointed to the Tunnel of Terror, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. The group ran inside, the darkness swallowing them. The boat ride began on its own, pulling them down a narrow, winding waterway. Shapes moved in the shadows, figures with elongated limbs and eyeless faces reaching out as they floated past. This isn't real, Mia whispered, clutching Emma's arm. It can't be real. The boat stopped abruptly in front of a curtain of fog. A voice echoed through the tunnel, deep and resonant. Welcome to Whispering Shadows. The fun never ends. The fog parted, revealing the clown from before, now flanked by two others just as grotesque. Their painted faces gleamed in the dim light, and their laughter shook the walls. What do you want? Jake shouted. To play, the lead clown rasped. It raised a skeletal hand, and the water beneath the boat churned violently. Arms reached out, pulling Jake into the depths. His screams were cut short as the water stilled, leaving only ripples. Mia and Lucas tried to climb out, but the walls of the tunnel stretched, closing in around them. Emma was the last to see their terrified faces before the darkness swallowed them. The next morning, the storm had passed. Whispering Shadows Amusement Park was gone, leaving no trace of its existence. But deep in the woods, if you listened closely, you could hear faint laughter and the haunting echo of carnival music. Some say the park takes a piece of everyone who enters, adding them to its twisted attractions, and those who dare to visit will find that the rides never stop.
Story number 7.
The night air was still as Alex, Jenna, Marcus, and Kelly hiked through the overgrown path leading to Crimson Valley Amusement Park, a place long abandoned after a mysterious fire 30 years ago. Legends claimed the fire wasn't an accident, that the park's owner, Mr. Harrow, had made a pact with something dark to make his attractions unforgettable. But when the park went up in flames during its grand reopening, dozens perished and no one spoke of it again. Alex had heard the story 100 times, but never believed it. Tonight, he convinced his friends to check it out. Armed with flashlights and a spirit box Jenna borrowed from her paranormal-obsessed cousin. Do you think we'll actually find anything? Marcus asked. His tone caught between curiosity and fear. Probably just rats and broken rides, Kelly said, adjusting her flashlight. But it'll be fun. As they approached the park's rusted gates, the air grew colder. The sign above the entrance, blackened from the fire, still bore the faint outline of its name. Crimson Valley, a night of endless thrills. The gates groaned as Alex pushed them open, revealing a landscape of shadows and decay. Despite its desolation, the park felt alive. The Ferris wheel loomed like a skeletal giant, its gondolas swaying in a non-existent breeze. A carousel stood eerily intact, its chipped horses frozen in wild, leaping poses. Somewhere in the distance, a faint off-key melody began to play. Do you hear that? Jenna whispered. Marcus nodded. Yeah, it sounds like carnival music. It's probably just the wind, Alex said, though he sounded less confident with each step. Let's check out the midway first. The group made their way past rotting food stands and toppled game booths. They stopped in front of the Laughing Clown Dunk Tank, where a faded sign read, Dunk to win big prizes. In the tank sat a disturbingly lifelike clown mannequin, its painted face cracked and peeling. The clown's mouth was frozen in a grin, but its glass eyes seemed to follow them. That thing's creepy as hell, Kelly muttered, keeping her distance. Let's try the spirit box, Jenna said, pulling it from her bag. She switched it on, and the static-filled hum crackled through the silence. Is anyone here with us? For a moment, there was nothing but the crackle of white noise. Then a voice broke through, low and guttural. Welcome back! Jenna's hand shook, nearly dropping the box. Did you hear that? Yeah, Marcus whispered. Let's go somewhere else. But before they could move, the clown in the tank jerked its head, a soft giggle escaping its painted mouth. Its eyes were no longer lifeless glass, but gleamed with malice. Run! Alex shouted. The group bolted, weaving through the debris-strewn midway. Behind them, the sound of metal scraping against concrete echoed, a horrible, grating noise that grew louder with every step. Alex risked a glance over his shoulder and froze. The clown was out of the tank, dragging its soaking wet body across the ground, leaving dark streaks in its wake. Its laugh grew louder, a sickening blend of childlike glee and predatory hunger. "Over there!" Kelly shouted, pointing to the House of Delights, a dilapidated funhouse with a facade of grinning faces. They scrambled inside, slamming the door behind them. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Dim, flickering lights cast erratic shadows on the walls, which were covered in peeling carnival posters. The laughter of the clown outside grew fainter, but a new sound filled the room, a soft, rhythmic tapping. "What's that?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. They followed the sound deeper into the funhouse, up where the halls grew narrower and the mirrors warped their reflections. In one mirror, Jenna's reflection moved independently, raising a hand to point toward her real self. Jenna screamed as her reflection began to bang against the glass, cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. The tapping turned into pounding as more reflections in other mirrors started to move, their distorted faces filled with malice. "Out! We need to get out!" Marcus yelled, pulling Jenna away. The group burst into another room, this one filled with carnival props, oversized dice, grinning masks, and dusty costumes. A small door in the corner caught Alex's eye. "Over here!" he shouted, wrenching it open. The door led to a spiral slide, its chute descending into darkness. Without hesitation, they slid down, landing in a massive room lit by hundreds of flickering candles. In the center stood a stage with a single figure, Mr. Harrow. The man was gaunt and pale, his suit burned in places, his eyes gleaming like coals. His voice was smooth but cold. "Welcome to the grand finale," he said, spreading his arms. Behind him, the clown from the dunk tank appeared, joined by other figures, burned carnival workers with melted faces and shadowy forms with glowing eyes. "You've trespassed on hallowed ground," Harrow continued, "and now you'll stay. Forever." The candles snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. Screams echoed as the shadows closed in. The next morning, Crimson Valley Amusement Park was gone, as if it had never been there. But the gate remained, and if you peered through it, you'd see new additions to the park. A mannequin clown in the dunk tank with Alex's face, a funhouse mirror with Jenna's reflection pounding desperately to escape, and burned posters featuring Kelly, Marcus, and their terrified smiles. Crimson Valley was always looking for new attractions.
Story number 8.
In the heart of a dense, uncharted forest stood Luna Park, an amusement park that had once been the crown jewel of summer vacations. But decades ago, the park mysteriously shut down after a night that no one could explain. Every employee and guest vanished, leaving only eerie silence and the occasional whisper of laughter carried on the wind. The park's legend had drawn thrill seekers and investigators over the years, but none returned. Tonight, it lured 4 friends, Maddie, Leo, Amber, and Ryan. They were amateur urban explorers with a penchant for the paranormal, and Luna Park was their holy grail. "I can't believe we're finally here," Maddie said, excitement mixed with unease. The group had hiked hours to reach the park, now overgrown with vines and hidden under the pale light of the full moon. "Looks like something out of a nightmare," Amber muttered, gazing at the twisted metal rides and faded carnival posters flapping in the breeze. The welcome sign, once vibrant, now bore ominous graffiti. "You can enter, but you'll never leave." Ryan shrugged. "It's just a creepy old park. Let's get some photos and see if we can find anything cool." They passed through the iron gates, stepping into a world frozen in time. The midway stretched before them, lined with shattered game booths and toppled food carts. The air was heavy, and the faint scent of cotton candy mingled with something metallic. Blood, maybe, or rust. "Let's start with the Ferris wheel," Leo suggested, pointing to the towering structure at the park's center. Its cars swayed in the wind, the metal creaking like an anguished groan. The closer they got, the louder the creaking grew until it sounded almost like voices, low, guttural whispers. "Do you hear that?" Maddie asked, her flashlight trembling. Amber nodded. "It's like chanting?" The Ferris wheel loomed above them, and Maddie froze. One of the cars wasn't empty. A figure sat inside, slumped forward. Its silhouette was thin, too thin, like a skeleton draped in loose skin. "Hello?" Maddie called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's head jerked up. Its face was a pale mask of hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide into a grin that seemed impossibly large. With a shuddering motion, it raised one bony arm and pointed directly at her. "Run!" Leo yelled, grabbing Maddie's arm. The four sprinted back toward the midway, but the park had changed. The booths and rides now appeared pristine, their lights flickering to life. A distorted version of carnival music blared through unseen speakers, its notes discordant and wrong. This isn't possible, Ryan gasped, looking around. The park was dead a minute ago. Keep moving, Amber shouted. There's got to be a way out. They stumbled into the Hall of Whispers, an attraction Maddie had read about during her research. The legend claimed it was where Luna Park's founder conducted occult experiments to bind the joy of the park forever. The entrance, shaped like a gaping mouth, beckoned them inside. We're not going in there, Leo protested. It's the only place that doesn't have creepy things chasing us right now. Amber shot back. Reluctantly, they entered. The interior was pitch black, and the air was thick, making it hard to breathe. As they moved deeper, faint voices began to fill the space, indistinct murmurs that grew louder and clearer. Help me, a child's voice pleaded. Don't trust the shadows, another whispered. The walls were lined with mirrors, but these weren't normal reflections. In them, the friends saw distorted versions of themselves. Maddie with a skeletal grin, Leo with empty, bleeding sockets, Amber screaming silently as her reflection clawed at the glass. Guys, Ryan stammered, backing away from his reflection, which stared back with a look of pure malice. We need to leave, now. As they turned to leave, the whispers converged into a single deafening voice. Stay. Forever. The mirrors shattered, and figures crawled out from the broken glass, twisted versions of the friends, their mouths gaping and eyes hollow. The doppelgangers lunged, forcing the group to scatter. Maddie ran deeper into the hall, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She burst into another room and froze. In the center stood a carousel, its horses replaced with grotesque creatures, half human, half beast. The ride began to spin, though no one was there to operate it. Climb on, a voice rasped behind her. Maddie spun around to see the skeletal figure from the Ferris wheel. Its grin had widened, its teeth impossibly sharp. Ride with me, it whispered. She screamed and bolted for the exit, reuniting with the others outside. But the park wouldn't let them go. The midway stretched endlessly, looping back to the same rides no matter which direction they ran. We're trapped, Amber cried. Not yet, Leo said, pointing to a rickety roller coaster in the distance. If we can get high enough, we might see a way out. Desperate, they climbed onto the coaster. The cars lurched forward, climbing the first hill at an agonizingly slow pace. The park below looked alive, figures moving between the rides, all staring up at them with unblinking eyes. As they crested the top of the hill, the world around them warped. The park stretched into infinity, and the sky above turned a sickly green. The coaster plunged downward faster than it should have been able to go, the track twisting in impossible directions. One by one, the friends were thrown from the ride. Maddie clung to the safety bar, screaming as the coaster careened into darkness. The next day, hikers found an overgrown clearing where Luna Park had been, but no sign of the friends. Only their phones remained, scattered near the rusted gates, playing distorted carnival music on an endless loop. And at night, if you stand near the forest's edge, you might hear faint laughter and the hum of an old Ferris wheel turning in the distance.